The wind moved through the dry valley like a whisper carrying dust, and heat through the air as 5 shadows moved low across the ground, their boots barely making a sound, as they followed the edge of a narrow river that had long since dried up. The team was quiet, each man watching a different direction, eyes sharp, weapons ready, heart steady, but beating fast, because this was enemy land, and they all knew it. They had flown in at night under the cover of darkness, landing far from the target point, and then walking for hours through hills and rocks and thorn bushes toward a village that was marked on their maps as possibly holding a hidden weapons cache. The team leader called. Clay signaled with his hand, and the others stopped. They dropped to one knee and looked ahead where the village came into view at the base of the hills, quiet and still like a painting without sound. Clay whispered into his mic, eyes locked on the small cluster of mud houses ahead. No movement, no people, no animals, nothing but still air and rising heat from the ground. It was too quiet, and Clay felt it in his gut. Something wasn't right. Beside him, Jones, the sniper, looked through his scope, sweeping slowly left to right, watching for anything, even a flicker of motion. But the windows were dark, the doors closed, the roads empty. Behind them, Brooks carried the heavy radio on his back and wiped sweat from his forehead, while Mason, the medic, checked his gear again, making sure the tourniquets and gauze were where they should be, even though he hoped he wouldn't need them today. At the back of the team was Diaz, the youngest on the mission, but already a sharp soldier, fast thinker, and deadly in close fights. His eyes kept scanning the ridge above the village, just in case. Clay gave the signal to move, and the 5 of them pushed forward slowly, low and silent, crossing the last stretch of dry dirt before they reached the outer edge of the village walls built of old stones and packed clay. They stopped just before the entrance and listened again, but there was still no sound, not even birds or barking dogs or wind through leaves, just silence, thick and heavy like something was holding its breath. Jones whispered, "Maybe they left, maybe it's empty." Clay didn't answer, because he didn't believe it. Something about the way the village looked felt off, like it was watching them without eyes. He pointed toward a narrow alley, and they moved in, sticking close to the walls, moving slow, weapons raised, feet soft on the ground like cats on the hunt. They passed a broken cart, a small cooking fire that had gone cold, and a bucket still half full of water, all signs that someone had been here not long ago, but no people in sight. As they reached the center of the village, Clay held up a fist, and everyone stopped again. He turned his head, slowly scanning the rooftops, the windows, the doors, but still no movement. Then they heard it. A soft click, a sharp, clean sound that echoed louder in the silence than a shout. Every man froze. They knew that sound. It was the sound of a rifle bolt sliding into place. Before anyone could move, the first shot rang out, shattering the still air. A bullet slammed into the wall, just inches from Jones, as he dropped to the ground and shouted, "Contact." Chaos broke loose, bullets, flying dust, rising voices shouting from every direction, as the SEALs scrambled for cover behind walls, barrels, and broken doors. Clay yelled for a count, and one by one they shouted back, confirming they were all alive. But then Brooks screamed out, "Hit, hit, hit," and fell behind a broken cart, clutching his leg, blood pouring out between his fingers. Mason dove to him, dragging him back as Diaz and Jones returned fire, aiming at shadows behind windows and rooftops, where flashes of light showed enemy shooters hidden in high positions. Clay ducked behind a stack of firewood, his mind racing, trying to figure out how many enemies there were. It sounded like at least 15, maybe more, and they were all around them, closing in fast. This was no accident. It was a trap, and the team had walked right into it. With no air support and no way to call for help, they were alone, deep in enemy ground and surrounded. Clay shouted, "We move back to the east alley, cover Mason and Brooks now." But before they could move, another shot cracked from above, this one different, sharper, more distant, and one of the enemies on the rooftop dropped suddenly, his rifle falling with a clatter. Jones saw it first, his eyes wide as he looked at the ridge that overlooked the village, the same ridge they had cleared earlier, the one they had marked as empty. There was someone up there, someone with a long rifle and a good eye, but the question hit them all at once. Who? Smoke drifted through the village, like a thin ghost wrapping around corners, floating above the dirt as gunfire echoed from every side, and the SEALs stayed low, moving like shadows, trying to survive. Brooks was still bleeding. Mason pressed a bandage to the wound, while Clay watched the rooftops, eyes sharp, heart heavy. He knew this was no normal fight. This was a trap, carefully planned, carefully set, and now they were stuck right in the middle. Jones kept firing short, quick bursts from his rifle, each shot tight. He had no time to think, only react, watching for movement behind broken windows or low walls. Diaz shouted enemy left side, and bullets ripped through the air as two figures appeared near the well, rifles flashing, until Clay and Diaz both returned fire, taking them down fast and clean. Mason looked up, face pale, sweat running down his neck, and said Brooks needs evac, or he's not gonna make it. But Clay shook his head. They had no air support, no radio signal. The enemy had jammed it all. Nothing was coming for them, not yet. They were alone, and the only way out was to fight. Clay pointed toward a nearby house with thick stone walls. They could use it for cover, maybe hold their ground, until they found a way to break through the circle of enemies closing in. The team moved together, covering each other step by step, while Mason dragged Brooks, who was trying to stay quiet, trying not to scream from the pain. They made it to the house just as another burst of fire came from the south side, bullets smashing into the walls, sending dust and rock into the air. Inside, the room was dark and cold. The air smelled of smoke and old cooking fires. The windows were small, but offered a view of the ridge above and part of the road below. Jones sat up near the window, scanning with his scope, while Diaz blocked the door with a table, and Mason worked fast to stop the bleeding on Brooks' leg using gauze and pressure and whatever else he had left in his pack. Clay stood near the wall, thinking, watching, listening, trying to understand the trap they were in and how to break it. This wasn't random. The way the enemies moved, the way they fired, it felt like they knew the SEALs would come through here. It felt like someone had told them, someone had leaked the mission. The idea made Clay feel cold inside, but he pushed it away, for now survival came first, questions later. Then it happened again. Another sharp, clean rifle shot rang out from the ridge, and another enemy fighter dropped hard near the entrance of the village. The SEALs froze for a moment, confused again. Jones whispered, someone's up there, someone's helping us. Clay didn't answer. He was thinking fast. Who would be on that ridge? Had been cleared just hours ago. They had checked it, scanned it, nothing was there. And yet someone was there now, and that someone had perfect aim. Two more shots came fast, taking out two more enemies hiding behind a wall across the road. The SEALs could hear shouting from the enemy side, panic rising, footsteps running, yelling in a language they didn't understand, but fear was easy to read in any voice. Whoever was on that ridge had just turned the fight upside down. Jones kept scanning, but he saw nothing, just rocks and dust and heat waves in the air. But someone was out there, someone who could shoot like a ghost in the wind. Clay used a moment of silence to check on Mason and Brooks. Brooks was breathing better, still hurting, but stable for now. Mason nodded and said, we buy time, that's all we can do. Diaz looked toward Clay and asked, should we push now? While they're scattered, Clay shook his head, not yet, not until we know who's up there and what they want. The idea of help was good, but it also came with risk. If the shooter was friendly, it could save them. If not, it could be a trap inside a trap. Still, the bullets were hitting the right targets, and that was enough for now. Outside, the village was changing. Enemies were pulling back, some hiding, some fleeing. The careful circle they had formed around the team was breaking, cracks forming, pressure shifting. Clay knew it was time to plan the next move. They couldn't sit in the house forever. The enemy might regroup or call for reinforcements, or worse, bring heavy weapons. The team needed to reach higher ground, maybe even the ridge, if they wanted a chance to escape. But first they had to be sure the ridge was safe, and that meant someone had to go up there and see. Clay looked at Diaz and Jones and nodded. You two take the back path, climb quiet, find out who's shooting and why. We'll hold here. Diaz gave a small grin and said, just like training, and Jones added, let's hope the ghost likes us. Then they slipped out through the rear window, moving like smoke between buildings, and into the narrow trail that led up toward the mysterious ridge. The rest of the team stayed quiet inside the house, weapons ready, breaths low, hearts steady, waiting to see what the ridge would reveal. The sky above the ridge was turning gold and orange as the sun dropped lower behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the rocks and brush, while Diaz and Jones moved slowly up the narrow path away from the village and toward the place they had thought was clear. They kept low, breathing, quiet, weapons ready, their eyes scanning every rock and bush, because someone had fired from up here, and they had no idea if that person was friend or enemy. The path twisted left, then right, climbing higher, and steeper each turn, revealing more of the valley below and more of the village, where Clay, Mason, and Brooks waited inside the old stone house. Far below they could hear faint gunfire still echoing as the last enemy fighters tried to regroup, but it was scattered now, weak, desperate, not like before. Whoever was up on the ridge had done real damage. Jones whispered, "Keep your eyes open," and Diaz nodded, without speaking, his hand tight on the grip of his rifle, his mind racing with questions. Who was helping them, and why were they up here alone? And how had they stayed hidden when the SEALs had scanned this ridge earlier? They reached a flat section where large rocks formed a kind of natural lookout over the village, and that was where they saw it. Empty shell casings scattered near a low pile of stones shaped like a small wall, the kind a sniper might use to hide behind while taking shots from above. Jones crouched low, picked up one of the casings, and looked at the markings, then nodded. This was no cheap weapon. Someone up here knew what they were doing. Diaz moved forward, scanning for more clues. When he spotted it, a dark trail of blood leading away from the firing position down the other side of the ridge into the thicker brush and dry grass. He pointed to it, and Jones gave a silent signal, "Let's follow." They moved carefully, staying low, following the blood trail step by step, the sun fading fast behind the hills, and the wind picking up with a dry hiss through the grass. After a few minutes, they heard it. A sound like a groan, low and quiet, coming from behind a thick bush near a dead tree. Jones raised his rifle while Diaz moved forward slowly, hands open, voice calm, saying, "We're not here to hurt you. We saw your shots. You helped us." From behind the bush came a reply, not in English, but the voice was weak, filled with pain. They pushed aside the branches and saw him. A man, maybe early 20s, wearing old torn clothes, holding a long sniper rifle across his lap, blood soaking his left shoulder and chest, his face pale, his eyes tired but alert. Jones lowered his weapon and moved closer, checking the wound, while Diaz looked around to make sure they were still alone. The man tried to speak again in broken English, pointing to the village and saying, "Bad men kill family long time ago. I stay here, I wait." It hit Jones fast. This wasn't just a sniper. This was a local, maybe a farmer, maybe a fighter, who had lost everything and turned the ridge into his place of revenge. He had seen the SEALs trapped and made his choice, picked up his rifle and started shooting. Jones said, "We're going to help you stay awake. We're taking you back with us." The man nodded slowly, barely able to keep his eyes open. Diaz helped lift him while Jones supported his back, and together they started down the ridge, one careful step at a time, the extra weight slowing them but not stopping them. As they moved, the wind picked up more dust, rising in the air like the ridge itself was letting go of a secret that had been hiding too long. Back in the village, Clay kept checking the ridge through a crack in the window, watching, waiting for the signal. When he finally saw two shapes moving down the path, he stood up fast and said, "They're coming back, and they're not alone." Mason helped Brooks sit up while Clay and Diaz cleared space near the door and opened it as Jones and Diaz appeared, carrying the wounded sniper between them. They laid him down on a blanket. Mason moved fast, checking the wound, cleaning it, pressing gauze to slow the bleeding, while the rest of the team gathered around, watching this stranger who had saved their lives. He looked up at them, eyes tired, but full of something strong, something fierce, maybe pride, maybe peace, maybe both. Clay knelt beside him and said, "Thank you. You didn't have to help us, but you did." The man tried to smile and whispered again, "Same men hurt my village. I fight them now. I see you in trouble, I shoot." That was all he said before his head leaned back and his eyes closed, not from death, but from exhaustion. Mason said, "He's stable for now, but we need to move soon." Clay looked toward the ridge once more, then at his team, then at the young sniper who had turned the tide of the battle. With just a few careful shots from the ridge they had once called empty. The village had grown quiet again, no more shouting, no more gunfire, only the sound of the wind slipping through the narrow alleys and over the rooftops, carrying dust and ashes through the air like a reminder of what had just happened. Inside the old stone house, the SEAL team gathered around the wounded sniper, watching him breathe slow and deep, his face calm, now his chest rising steady under a blanket that Mason had wrapped around him to keep his body from going cold. Diaz sat near the door, eyes watching the street outside, while Clay stood near the window looking up at the ridge where the man had made his stand, a ridge they had scanned and cleared and still missed the one person who had changed everything. Mason checked the pulse again and whispered, "He's hanging on, but he needs better care soon, Brooks. who was still propped against the wall, gave a weak smile and said, "We all do." Jones wiped the dirt from his rifle and said, "I can't believe he did that alone, picked them off one by one, without being seen. That kind of shooting takes skill and nerves made of steel." Clay nodded, but said nothing. He was thinking about what this meant, about who this man was, and what had made him stay on that ridge, all alone, waiting for a moment like today. The sniper had barely spoken, but his eyes had told enough, full of pain, full of purpose, full of something that ran deeper than revenge. He had waited in silence, with one rifle and one reason, and when the time came he had acted, without fear, without asking for anything in return. Diaz looked over at Clay and said, "What now?" Clay said, "We move before nightfall. They'll send more soon, maybe a full squad. We can't hold this place forever." The radio was still dead, the signal jammed, and there was no way to call for air support or extraction, not yet. But Clay had a plan. "We move north past the village to the dry riverbed. It leads through a narrow pass and connects to higher ground. If we get up there, we might break through the signal jam and call for help." Diaz nodded and said, "How do we move Brooks?" And the sniper Mason answered slowly and carefully, "I'll take Brooks, you and Jones help carry the sniper. We'll switch when needed." Clay checked his map one last time, then folded away and gave the order, "Move out, 5 minutes, tight formation, eyes up, weapons ready." They moved fast through the village, using every bit of cover they could find: broken walls, shattered carts, old fences, every step careful, every corner checked. The sniper never woke, but his breathing stayed steady, and that was enough. The sun was almost gone now, the sky turning purple and deep red shadows stretching long and cold across the ground as the team reached the edge of the village and dropped down into the dry riverbed below. The walls of the riverbed rose around them, tall and rough, made of rock and packed dirt, offering some cover from enemy eyes above. Clay led the way, moving fast, but silent his steps, sure his eyes scanning, always scanning for movement, for signs of danger. Jones and Diaz followed, with the sniper carried between them, then Mason and Brooks close behind. For a while the only sounds were the crunch of boots, the hiss of wind, and the slow breaths of the man who had become their silent ally. Then from ahead came a noise, a small sound like loose gravel shifting under someone's foot. Clay froze, raised his hand, and everyone dropped to a crouch, weapons raised, eyes sharp. A shadow moved near the bend in the riverbed, just for a second, then it vanished. Clay pointed left, Diaz nodded and flanked wide, moving fast and low, then circling back from behind the rocks. Within seconds he returned, gave a signal, and whispered, "2 enemy scouts, armed light, maybe more coming." Jones whispered back, "What now?" Clay thought fast, then said, "We set an ambush, short, sharp, loud. We end it quick, then keep moving before they call it in." They placed the sniper and Brooks down behind a rock wall, then spread out, taking positions along the riverbed. Diaz near the high ground, Jones and Clay in the center, Mason ready to protect the wounded. Minutes passed, then the scouts appeared, moving slow, their rifles loose, their eyes lazy, not expecting what was waiting for them. Clay gave the signal. In seconds the silence was broken by bursts of fire, 2 quick shots from Jones, 1 from Diaz, a shout from one scout, then silence again, both targets down. Clay gave the go sign, and the team moved fast, picking up the wounded and continuing forward, leaving the bodies behind as dust swirled around their boots, and the air began to cool with the coming night. They had made it through the trap, and now they were moving through the dark with a ghost at their side, a man who had once lost everything and now had helped them find their way again. But danger was still out there, and the road ahead would not be easy. The night came fast as the team moved through the narrow riverbed, the sky above turning black and full of stars, while the air grew colder with every step, and the sound of boots on dirt was the only thing they could hear. Clay led the way, flashlight covered by his hand showing just enough to avoid sharp rocks and hidden dips. The rest followed close behind, carrying their wounded, moving as fast as they could without making noise. Mason walked beside Brooks, helping him stay upright, checking his pulse every few minutes, whispering small words to keep him awake and focused, while Jones and Diaz took turns carrying the silent sniper, whose eyes stayed closed, but whose breath still came slow and steady. They had no name for him, no background, no story, just a face and a rifle and a heart that had chosen to help them when no one else would. The trail curved left then right, climbing slightly until they reached a place where the walls of the riverbed dropped low and opened into a flat rocky field covered in dry grass and scattered trees. The pass Clay had talked about was near, just beyond the next ridge. Clay held up his hand, and the team stopped, everyone listening, looking, breathing slow. The world felt still again, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of still that hides danger, the kind that waits in silence before making its move. Jones whispered, "I don't like this, too open, too quiet." Diaz nodded, "I feel it too, something's wrong." Then they heard it. A low thump from behind them far back, near the village, followed by another, then the sound of engines, small ones, fast ones, moving across the land. Clay cursed under his breath and said, "They're coming, dirt bike scouts, maybe even a truck. We need to move now." He pointed toward the next ridge, and they picked up the pace, carrying the wounded faster, even though every step pulled at their strength and pushed their breath harder. As they climbed the rocky hill, the engines grew louder. Behind them, headlights, cutting through the trees, voices, shouting in the dark, weapons being cocked ready for a chase. Mason turned to Clay and shouted, "We can't outrun them like this, not with Brooks, not with him." Then the sniper opened his eyes. His face was pale, but his gaze was clear. He looked at Clay, then at the others, then at the ridge ahead, and shook his head slowly. He pushed away from Diaz, and Jones stood up on shaky legs and pointed toward a narrow rock path that led up and away from the main trail, a hidden way through the hills. Jones asked, "What is it?" and the sniper whispered, "Short way, safe way, not seen, not chased." Clay nodded fast. "Let's go, he leads us now." The sniper moved slow, at first limping, bleeding, but determined, and the team followed, trusting him, because he had already saved them once, and now he was doing it again. They moved through the hidden path, between rocks and brush, ducking under twisted trees, slipping through shadows, while the sound of the enemy faded behind them, searching the wrong direction, too loud, too fast, to notice the trail the ghost had shown them. An hour passed, maybe more, before they stopped near a high cliff, where the land dropped away into the dark below. Clay climbed to the edge, holding his radio up high, turning in slow circles, trying to catch a signal. Then finally, it came clear and sharp in his ear, the voice of command asking for his call sign. "This is Clay, we need evac. Now, we have wounded, repeat, we have wounded, and a local ally request pickup at grid 9 Bravo 07, fast extraction, enemy close." The reply was quick and firm. "Birds inbound 15 minutes. Hold position, keep heads low, stay hidden." Clay turned back to the team and gave a nod, "We're getting out." Mason smiled weakly and patted Brooks on the shoulder, while Diaz dropped to one knee beside the sniper, who had collapsed again, body shaking from blood loss, from pain, from everything he had carried alone. Jones pulled out a water pack and held it to his lips, whispering, "We're not leaving you, not after what you did." The sound of blades came next, soft at first, then louder, then rising, until the wind kicked up dust and leaves, and the team covered their faces as the rescue chopper came into view, low and fast over the trees. Ropes dropped, the door opened, and voices shouted orders, as the team loaded the wounded first, then climbed aboard one by one, weapons still ready, eyes still watching the dark below. The sniper was last, lifted carefully by Clay, and Jones held between them like a brother, like one of their own. Inside the bird, the medic checked him over, started fluids, gave oxygen, while Clay sat beside him, looking at the young man's face lit by red cabin lights. He had never said much, never asked for anything, never complained. He had just seen danger and acted, done the impossible from a place no one had thought to look. And now he was here, flying with the men he had saved, a silent ghost who had stepped from the rocks and changed everything. The helicopter rose higher into the sky, its blades cutting through the dark like thunder, the wind roaring around the open doors, while the lights of the valley faded behind them, swallowed by night and distance. Inside the cabin, the SEAL team sat close together, backs against the wall, holding their gear, watching their wounded brothers, breathing steady and silent. Brooks lay still, eyes closed, but awake, his chest rising slow. With every breath, Mason sat beside him, hand resting on his shoulder, checking his vitals again and again, just to be sure. Across from them, the young sniper rested, wrapped in a blanket, his face pale, his body weak, but his eyes now open, staring up at the ceiling of a bird, as if trying to understand where he was and what had just happened. Clay sat beside him, watching, thinking, remembering every moment since the first shot from the ridge, the shot that had turned fear into hope and darkness into a way out. The pilot's voice came through the headset, clear and sharp. 20 minutes. To base, stay alert, we're not clear yet. Jones gave a nod and scanned the ground below through the open door, his rifle still across his lap, just in case something followed them out of that cursed valley. Diaz leaned close to Clay and whispered what's going to happen to him, meaning the sniper, meaning the ghost, who had saved them, meaning the stranger, who had stood alone on the ridge and made a choice that few would ever understand. Clay answered softly, "He'll be safe, we'll make sure of it." The chopper shook slightly as it hit a pocket of wind, but kept moving strong and steady across the land until finally the base lights came into view like stars lined up on the ground calling them home. As they landed, the ramp dropped and medics rushed in, pulling stretchers, loading the wounded carefully, voices sharp and fast, but full of care, moving with speed, but also respect. Mason jumped down first, guiding Brooks. As they lifted him, then turned back to help with the sniper, who had begun to drift in and out of sleep, his lips moving with soft words no one could understand. The team followed close behind, weapons slung across their backs, boots hitting the concrete hard, their faces covered in dust and sweat, and something more, something deeper, that no water or rest could wash away. Inside the medical tent, Clay stood beside the sniper, watching as doctors worked to clean the wounds, stitch the skin, replace blood lost to the rocks and dirt of the ridge. The sniper's eyes opened for a second, locking with Clay's, and for that moment neither man said a word, but something passed between them, something true and quiet and unbreakable. The next day, the base commander called Clay in, asking questions about the mission, the ambush, the firefight, the strange sniper who had appeared like a ghost and turned the battle upside down. Clay answered all of it with calm and care, explaining how the young man had no flag, no uniform, no orders, but had chosen to fight on their side because of pain, because of loss, because of something bigger than orders or borders. The commander listened, then nodded and said, "We'll find a way to help him, maybe even bring him in, if that's what he wants." Clay left the room, feeling a weight lift from his chest, a small one, but real. Back in the tent, the sniper sat upright now, sipping water, wrapped in clean clothes, the wounds healing little by little, color returning to his cheeks. Jones and Diaz walked in and smiled, offering him a patch from their unit, a small piece of cloth with a symbol of strength and brotherhood. The sniper took it slowly with both hands and pressed it to his chest, eyes shining in the soft light of the tent. Days passed and healing began. The team rested, trained, debriefed, but never stopped thinking about the mission, about how close they had come to the end, and how a stranger's single choice had changed their story. Before they left the base, Clay visited the sniper one last time. He brought a photo taken from the ridge, showing the village below, and the trail they had followed, and the place where it all began. He placed it in the sniper's hand and said, "You saved us. You'll always be part of this team, no matter where you go." The sniper smiled, the first full smile Clay had seen, and nodded once, clear and strong. As Clay walked out into the bright sun, the wind passed over him, warm and light and full of promise, and he knew that this story would never leave him, that the ridge would always be part of him. Not because of the danger or the fight, but because of the moment when everything seemed lost, and then one single shot from an unknown ally changed everything.